Hello, all of you I Can Do Anything podcast listeners. Today we have Leah Elson on the podcast with Pam Troon. Welcome to the podcast, Leah.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
We are thrilled to have you. I met you through my strength coach, Ashley Randall. She had you on her podcast, and I heard that you were coming out with a book, and I had to have you on for our book club.
I love it.
Tell us about your origins, where you started college. I know you're a Harvard graduate, which of course I'm wildly jealous of. Highly educated. Tell us that story and how you came into the science realm.
So, as any good mad scientist origin story, mine is also somewhat strange. I was always a very fringe child, right? And one of the things that I love to tell is that, as I was younger and got into junior high and people were sort of forming, young relationships and like getting boyfriends and like, oh, I kissed a boy on the lips. I was raising brine shrimp to study their morphology as they developed, right? Like I was finding especially strange rocks and like examining them, you know what I mean? And so that was my sort of vibe, if you will. And I always had this massive level of curiosity. And I think that at our crux, all scientists are sort of, we have this childlike curiosity that we never grew out of, right? And that's what drives what we do. And so I always had this propensity for science. I had great aptitude academically. And when I got into college, I did what everybody did, where you sort of get into college and you're like, well, what do I do with my life now? And I was an athlete and I was a ham in front of the camera. And so what I actually gravitated into initially was sportscasting. And so early on in my college career, I was doing sports journalism and, still taking science courses, but I was like, oh, I can do this and it's fun. And I work like twice a week and get paid for it. And that's great. And my dad actually ended up getting incredibly sick. He had cancer and he was having all of these radical dissections and things. And they kept finding cancer and it was super difficult. And I was like, became sort of like a figurehead in the family trying to keep him strong and everybody else strong. And I was on the sidelines one night and they were counting me down live, my production team, 3, 2, 1. And I remember we went live and I'm holding my microphone. And I mean, I had just gone through this massive surgery with my dad. And I remember thinking to myself, what the hell am I doing with my life right now? I could be doing something so much more impactful for families that have been going through what we've been going through, And so I quit the very next week and I consulted with a bunch of my close friends. And I think oftentimes when we make large life pivots, it's imperative to reach out to those that know you sometimes better than you know yourself. And a bunch of them individually were like, you should do like science and medicine. You would be great at it. And so I sort of I pivoted and I explored and I got back into the sciences and kind of went full bore. And that's where my career took me. And at the time I was just about to finish college. And so that's where Harvard came in. I was at San Diego State originally, close to where my dad was. And then I was like, all right, well, if I want to, do like science and medicine, I've got to go back and take my sciences, but I'm about to graduate with this degree that doesn't really apply. So I applied all over the nation. And Harvard has a program where if you already have a bachelor's degree, like they will train you in pre-medical sciences, right? So chemistry, biology, biochem, organic chemistry, all of that really nasty stuff, right? And I got in, and it's one of those things where it's like when Harvard accepts you, you're not going to say no, right? So I sold my little used 2002 Ford Escape, and I took the cash for it, and I literally flew out to Boston with a couple of suitcases and started my rest of my life in the sciences, and that's sort of how I began.
What was your favorite class that you took, or when did you know you were going to go into a particular field?
That's a good question. One of my favorite classes, I love physics. I'm a very kind of intuitive science person. And at Harvard, I mean, they obviously have quite a large budget, right? And so we had his name's Wolfgang Ruckner. I'll never forget. He's got a very scary name and he had very scary exams. So I think it was applicable. And he would set up these really elaborate physics experiments. Like he had a cherry picker crane, you know what I mean? Like one of
Yeah.
those things that you ride up in. And he dangled a little stuffed monkey from this cherry picker like on the other side of the lecture hall, and then he set up like a little air compressor cannon on the other side, and he was like, if I am a good physicist, I should be able to calculate the exact trajectory where if I drop this monkey and fire this cannon from, 40 feet away, that it'll hit the monkey dead center of mass. And sure enough, it did. And it was amazing to like watch all these big experiments happen in the front of the classroom. I was like, this seems really reckless and I love it. So physics was always really intuitive to me, but so much of my life, I mean, I worked all through college, all through my graduate degrees. I don't think I've been just a student since I was in high school. And so I began doing research right before I went to Harvard, just as a research assistant, and got to Harvard and I applied to, man, like 120 research jobs. And I got called in at Massachusetts General Hospital and I was working in the orthopedics department there. And that's where I really developed this strong love for upstream innovative medical research and like epidemiologic research, looking at, are things that we're doing for patients actually working, et cetera. And so that's where I was like, yeah, no, this is what I really love. And it was a blast. And I got to travel during that gig. I traveled to Berlin and to Copenhagen to present my research, and I remember thinking like, I'm not worthy to be doing this. But it really did sort of start that fire, I think, for research from there on out. So.
And where did that take you after your research stint was done and you graduated from Harvard?
So when I finished that Harvard program, I was like, I need more sciences, and so I enrolled at Johns Hopkins and I completed a Master of Science in Biotechnology. And biotech, it was just sort of an umbrella term, but it was mostly for people that had a strong interest in medical research. So they taught us cancer biology and molecular biology and neuroscience and sort of all of these like very grand graduate hard science courses. And I was there for about 2.5 years, and that was awesome. And then thereafter, I did like a little stint in med school. And halfway through med school, my dad, again, like health wasn't doing well. So I took a leave of absence. And it was one of those things where I was in med school and I liked it and it was great. But I felt like I had established this research career already and I was publishing, really rapidly. And I was like, I love the patient contact, but my drive in life was always to be able to affect the maximum amount of people possible. And I was like, I think because I have a gift in research, if I stay upstream medicine and I help develop and design things, I could potentially affect thousands of patients over the course of my life versus seeing like 10 to 12 a day. I could maybe design something that can impact a whole bunch of people. So I kind of left med school and then went to the USC Keck School of Medicine, and I studied in epidemiology and biostats, and I'm pursuing a PhD in molecular biology now. So there's so many universities and schools. I don't know what it's like to not be in school at this point in my life.
I finally took a break from education. I thought I need a break after 20 some years of being in school.
It's weird, right? You're like, what do I do with my free time?
Yeah. I can read a book. That's not a school book, a textbook. Yeah. Even after college and graduate school, I still took my PMP, my BRMP. So yeah, it's constant learning.
It's an addiction. It is.
Yeah. What is a research paper or a study that you're super proud of?
Ooh. So one study that I did was somewhat recent. I have an eclectic background if you were to look at my CV. So I've been involved in novel technology. I've been involved in orthopedics, oncology, and then also now my most recent career pivot is in peripheral nerve repair. But the thing that I'm most proud of is that a few years ago, the American Cancer Society came together with, a bunch of practitioners, and they said, for people that have a certain number of years of smoking history, they should probably be getting annual CT scans to check just, preemptively for cancer. But when you are exposing patients to annual CT, you are also increasing their risk in this sort of strange catch-22 of then getting cancer from being irradiated every year, right? Because CT scans, that's a lot of radiation to be able to get that big look at the chest. And so something that I was really proud of is that I took this massive group of patients, you're talking tens of thousands of patients, from a registry that the United States sort of puts together. It's a big cancer registry, and it collects leukemia and breast cancer and prostate cancer and all kinds of things. And I looked at all the lung cancer patients up till that point, and I said, okay, and I used, because I'm a statistician, I forecasted, all right, based on this trend, before we started implementing CTs, how many patients would have come in with late stage lung cancer. So we would have expected, based on those trends without CTs, we would have captured, I can't remember what the actual number was, but I had a little graph and I was like, this is where we would have landed. So now let me see, based on current data, and having done these CTs for the last couple of years, were we able to catch earlier stage disease? Is it working? Is it worth the risk? And it turns out we did. You kind of saw that dip. So the CT scans were catching patients earlier, meaning they had way better prognoses. That's life-saving stuff. And it was awesome because it got accepted as a presentation at, it was, I can't remember the name of it, like this large international lung cancer society. And they had this big meeting in Seoul. And at the time it was during COVID, so nobody really traveled. But, to say, hey, I took a nation's worth of data and I'm able to show you that what we decided to do is actually efficacious. That was awesome. And I was really proud of that one. So
Congratulations. That is amazing.
thank you. Thank you. And it's good, because sometimes in medicine, medicine and all research, all science, you say, I think this is the best course of action, but you sort of need to allow the real life data to prove it out. Right. So it was good to say, to see rather, that, yeah, this actually did work the way that we expected it to. So it was awesome.
Before we get to the book, I do want to say that I have followed you on Instagram for quite some time now. Something else that you're really big into that I'd like to hit on a bit, Pam will be interested in this too, is your weightlifting. How did you get into weightlifting?
Sure. So, I've been an athlete through college, and when college got done, and it's sort of like being a student the whole time, you're like, well, what do I do with myself now that I'm not going to practice 5 days a week and like traveling on the weekends? And I started out just kind of trying to maintain that athletic niche, and I got into running, and I hated every moment of it. But I ran the Miami Marathon. I ran like a battery of half marathons, and I hated it every time. I was like, this is terrible, but I get a really big medal and then I get to go to brunch, and that's cool. I like that part, not so much the actual running process. But I had done weight training through the course of, being an athlete, especially in college. I would do a lot of weightlifting. And then, so I was like, okay, I'm gonna start getting into lifting. So I did that. And then I ended up getting called in by a producer for the NBC Titan Games. And I went to the combine for that. And I was like one of 30 women that were called in to potentially be on season 2. And so I trained really heavily for that. And when I got there, I met all of these amazingly strong, independent women who were Olympic weightlifters and power lifters. And I was like, these are my people. Like, running is not the jam. Like, these people eat so much. And I love that idea of that. And so thereafter, after touching base with so many people, I was like, yeah, I really like powerlifting. And so I got into that. I would say, what was that? 2020. So I've been doing that now for 3.5 years or so, doing the actual powerlifting thing. And it's awesome. And I joke, but I'm not joking. I'm like, I lift 6 days a week, not because I like muscles, but because I like to eat. So I'm facilitating my eating habits. It really is what that is. But it's great. And there's something wonderful about going in as a woman, and especially because I kind of look like a pack of Skittles when I work out. I've got so many different colors on and socks that usually don't match. I'm kind of chaotic to behold. And then go in, and you're deadlifting and like clanging and banging these big heavy weights. And, sometimes I'll film myself just for the sake of checking my form or whatever. And I love catching in the background, like guys will stop working out to see me deadlift like 200 something pounds, 270 pounds, something. And then I'll do it. And you see them go like, okay. So it's always good. It gasses you up a little bit. So
the other thing that I really enjoy watching you, and I believe that you role model this, at least in my opinion, is that you show the good and the bad. So there are some days you'll say, hey, great day, hit my PR, or I hit my goals for the day. And then other days you'll say, didn't quite hit it today. And then you'll show those videos that you were trying to hit a PR or you were trying to do something, and it just was an off day. You still did really well. You were there, you got it done, but you also show the realism of life. And I really appreciate that. I am obviously working with other people and with Ashley Randall. It is true and raw, and what you see is what you get. There's nothing fake about you. And I really appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that. I didn't intend, I think, in this sort of social media journey, I was never like, this is going to be a big thing. I kind of did it for the amusement of my friends, more or less. And as it has grown and continued to expand, I mean, and it has exploded over the course of the last couple of weeks randomly. I've always tried to make that a priority. Like, I'm going to show you me without makeup, looking haggard, me not completing lifts. I'm going, and really when you meet me in person, the persona is not a persona. I am that kind of glitchy and silly and bubbly and a little bit awkward. So I feel like it's really important because social media is such a sort of constructed facade of what you want people to see, but I also want people to see the real aspect, because we get so far away and there's all this sort of compare and despair. And I feel like it's mentally damaging for this generation. So
Agree. We're real here. There's nothing fake going on here. All right. One more thing before we get to your book. Your tattoos. I love your tattoos.
Well, thank you. I had a man come up to me in baggage claim today and asked to see all of my sleeve. And I was like, sir, I don't know you, but okay, let's do it. Let's walk you through the tattoos.
Do you have a favorite?
Oh, I have a big pink tardigrade on my hip, and it's like this very like comically pudgy pink tardigrade, and it's very like bright and colorful, and it has this banner wrapped around it that says tardigrade tough. And I think that that's adorable and silly. Most of my tattoos are like very geeky, but the sleeve is beautiful. It's this, you guys can probably see it on camera. I mean, it's all black and white realism. And I kind of I didn't know what this sleeve was going to be, right? Normally you go in, you're like, I have this tattoo. I want it to say mom on my shoulder, or whatever. You give it to the artist and then they do it. I gave this artist a bunch of ideas, just like pictures. I was like, I want a lot of this incorporated into like kind of one undulating contiguous piece. And I didn't see it at all until the day I walked in, because he does not like to go back and forth with clients. So I was driving there. It takes me like a couple hours to get to him. And I was like, oh boy, I don't know what this is going to look like. And I was blown away when I saw it. I was like, oh, this is so cool. So I kind of just let him do his thing, and he's crushed it so far. So
yeah, your tattoos are amazing.
Thank you so much. And it's funny story about that is that I've got quite a few, but they're covered because, you're in academia or you're in biotech, and I lecture quite frequently. And so you're up on podium and, it's kind of that like old school world where it's like, oh, this girl's got tattoos. And my boss, he's very, very cool. I love him. He's a fantastic mentor. Somebody mentioned a little tattoo that they saw on me, and they're like, oh, I like that. And he kind of like, just as a sidebar was like, oh yeah, I don't mind tattoos. Like, as long as you're being genuine to yourself, like that's great. And I don't think he anticipated my reaction, because I was literally like, say less. And I booked an entire sleeve knowing that the boss was okay with it. I was like, say less, I got this. And I came back in like a couple months later with like this full sleeve, and he was probably not what I had in mind or what I thought you were going to do, but groovy.
It works.
It works.
Great segue into the tardigrade.
Yes.
Tell us about how the book came to be.
So I have a now 6-year career in public science communication, and I have very early on, I decided I'm going to let the public just ask the expert questions, because so often in science communication, it's sort of like a top down, expert is lecturing to you what they think you should know. But I think that that's the wrong approach, because I think if you want to inspire awe and wonder in people, you have to teach them what they want to learn, right? Because they didn't get that opportunity in school. And that's why you get a bunch of people that turn away from STEM. So I'm like, guys, ask me anything you want. I do upstream medical research, but you want to know about the cosmos? I got you. You want to know about ocean stuff? I got you. So I get questions submitted all the time. And as any good content creator or podcast host has, right, you have like a repository of things you can pull from, or hosts or guests that you want to host, et cetera. And so I have this massive list of questions that they were just a little bit more, they required more detail that I could get in like, 60 to 90-second videos. And so I'm looking at this list one day, and it's like a Tuesday morning, and I'm driving into the oncology center, blasting really loud music obnoxiously. And I was thinking about this list, and I was like, man, like these questions, they're beautiful because they're so simple, but they evoke these really elegant responses, right? And I was like, someone should write like a kind of sarcastic book that answers all these questions. And then in the same thought, I was like, dude, I should write that book. And so I literally went home that day, and I kid you not, I Googled, how do you write a book? And I went down the rabbit hole of like different avenues you could take. And, do you want to get an agent? Do you not want to get an agent, et cetera? And so I went the traditional route, and luckily she got it. It's a very kind of a bizarre book. It's illustrated in crayon as well, because I wanted to sort of pay homage to that childlike nature of all these questions coming from adults. And I was like, man, there's no way anyone's gonna want this book. And sure enough, a publisher saw it and they were like, we dig it, and they bought it up. So, and that's the origin of There Are No Stupid Questions.
I I loved the book.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that.
And the pictures were amazing. Were
That
you an were you
no,
always an artist, or how did those drawings come to be?
they came to be very stressfully is how they came to be. I you know I always kind of liked drawing, but it's never something that I did. I mean, if before I illustrated the book, I probably hadn't sat down in any concerted manner to illustrate anything in years. And I was like, this is a really good idea. And then I wrote the book first. So I did the content, and then I turned the manuscript in early, and then I gave myself 6 weeks to illustrate it. And I sat down and I was like, why the hell did I decide to illustrate a book? This is crazy. And some of them were rather easy, and I sort of allowed the I'm a very kind of like, I would say, recklessly spontaneous person. I kind of live a bit chaotically. And so I was like, I'm going to sit down, and I don't want to do like hard-nosed diagrams and schematics that you would be used to seeing. I kind of want to do like a more or less like a taste of what the passage is about, but sort of bizarre and strange. And so I would sit down and I would look at a title of a passage and be like, first thing that comes to mind, what are you going to do? And that's how they came to be. And so then it was just sitting there drawing with crayons, watching Netflix, and just shading with crayons. And I can show you guys, I actually have some of the originals here, because in order to make sure that the images turned out clearly upon print, my publisher had to digitize them, because the sketchy crayon it wouldn't show very well. It would just look like kind of a poor print. And so the only part that I am sad about is I feel like they lost a little bit of their character when you can't see them in their like actual crayon render. And so I'm trying to find a good one here for you guys. I mean, like, there's a recurring moon character, but you can see like the kind of
Yes.
sketchy, the crayon aesthetic of it. And
Yes.
so Crayola, if you're listening, get at me. Let's make something happen. But I did. I took, I think for anybody listening, if you're like, oh, I can't write a book, or I can't publish something, because I don't have like all the fancy art supply. I literally sat on my couch, and I mean, this sketch pad, it's a child's sketch pad for like $2 at Walmart. And I used a 64 box of crayons, and I sketched in carpenter pencils from Home Depot because I had them. I was like, oh, that's a pencil, I'll use that. I mean, every artist out there is probably literally face palming in unison hearing that, but that's what happened. And so I like to think that it's a testament to like, listen, you can make it happen. You don't need to have like a fancy easel and whatever. Just go with your heart, and just put your passion into it. And I think that shows in the end product.
I have my three favorite chapters. Pam, we haven't heard from you yet. Why don't you tell us what I don't know how many favorite chapters you had.
Well, so first I want to say that about the crayons and the sketch pad. It's like sometimes we tend to overcomplicate things, and you don't have to overcomplicate it. Keep it simple. That's it.
I love that. Yeah, totally agree.
I enjoyed the chapter on why men have nipples.
That's a crowd favorite.
I was like, I never thought of that. Men have nipples just like women have nipples, but it's true. Why do men have nipples? I also enjoyed the one on sperm.
Yep.
Not gonna lie about that. What other one did I'm going to tell you that I listened to your book on Audible, and you are a fantastic narrator.
Thank you so much for saying that. I was so worried during the process. I was like, I hope that this is being conveyed in a way that's funny and is still, gripping. But
I said to Robin this morning, I said, if she would have taught me biology, I would have paid more attention.
Oh, that honors me.
Well, because it's like you make it so interesting. It's light and easy to follow. And, for somebody who doesn't have a biology degree or a PhD or any other type of degree like that, like I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And it really got me thinking on a couple different things. So I also liked the one about where honey comes from.
Oh my God. Those two. So the why do men have nipples and is honey bee poop? Those two are like when people talk to me about the book, the ones that everyone loves. Which is so funny.
It's one of my top three.
The illustration, if I had to pick a favorite illustration, the honey one for me was one of my favorites to do because you've got that poor bee just huddled over a toilet and his all little wings are all rumpled. That was one of my favorites to illustrate for sure.
Yeah. I love the honey. I love the diamonds. I honestly thought diamonds came from coal.
And it's so funny, so many, and it's interesting that you mentioned that because the topic of one of my next books is debunking pseudoscience that we hold so dear, right? Things that you're like, oh yeah, that's second nature. We all know that's true, and it's actually completely false. And so the diamond one is definitely an interesting one for sure.
That one is in there too. I will be vulnerable and say I really thought we came from monkeys, apes.
I know it.
I am educated, and I am embarrassed to say that I honestly was like, what is she talking about? What do you mean we evolved in parallel?
Yeah, and it's that's a good one. If I had been doing schematics to actually show the lineage tree, because you can see the little branches. There's like the main branch from our common ancestor, and then we all kind of pop off one after the other. And yeah, that's a really good one. And it's again, and for things like this, because it's such a widely held belief, and a lot of people, they contest evolution and they say, yeah, but like if we came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys around? And to me, that's sad, because that means that people like myself, we haven't done our job right. It's not ownership on the part of the public to understand science when they weren't classically educated in it. It's up to the experts to clarify that. If there's so many people that believe that, then we drop the ball somewhere, right? So it's my pleasure to be able to kind of pick up some of those pieces and get people to think, and they're like, oh, okay. And it's intuitive, when you hear it, you're like, oh, that makes sense.
My other top three, well, I guess now I've got four, but the other one that I really like too is, how do we know that we're seeing the same color? I have wondered that forever.
Yes.
How do we know that the green I'm seeing is the exact same green that you're seeing, and that everybody else sees the same color? I loved that chapter.
That was one, people often ask me, did you learn anything new in writing this book? Because the book is very extensively researched, right? So I went through to great lengths. I mean, every section that I wrote, I would reference and cross-reference to make sure, because science does evolve, that everything was kind of up to date at the time of writing. And that one, if you had asked that question 5-10 years ago, the answer would have been different. And that's the cool thing, it would have been, it's the same neural circuitry. We're probably all seeing the same color, but the findings from the study that I cited were actually somewhat recent. And so that's a cool one to learn something new from, for sure.
What was your favorite chapter of the book?
My favorite chapter. I love space, and I always tell people, ask me, oh, if you had to do it again, what would you do if you had to go into the sciences again? And I would probably do like astrophysics or something. I'm enthralled by the universe. And one of my favorites, which was also paradoxically one of the most stressful, was answering, why can't anything travel faster than the speed of light?
Oh, yeah.
And the problem, but the beauty about that question is that there are two answers to that, and both are steeped in incredibly dense theoretical physics, and the concepts are so esoteric. And so I had to choose one, and one of them is, if there's something of mass, right? If we're not talking about a photon, but something that has mass, like an ant or something, the closer that approaches the speed of light, the closer its mass reaches infinity, which makes no sense intuitively. You're like, what do you mean? It just gains mass. But the way that the math shakes out, that's what happens. And then the other one is like a time dilation thing. And so I was like, I mean, of the two, I guess I'll do time dilation, but they're both esoteric. And I mean, I tell you, I read that section and read it and read it and read it. And I was like, man, I feel like I need an adult here that studies this, because even just using like choice words or adjectives can change what you're trying to evoke. And so I was like, man, and the interesting thing, and I can probably say this publicly, I don't know like why it would be a hush hush thing, but Neil deGrasse Tyson has my book. And I was like, I would love for Neil to just read it and tell me if that's right. You know what I mean? Because I know I'm saying it right, but I'm so nervous because it's not my field. And I don't want him or somebody to read it and be like, this girl doesn't know what she's talking about. You know what I mean? So that one it's my favorite because it's so interesting and bizarre, but it was also the most stressful. I mean, I read that thing probably 30 times and I was like, this doesn't even make sense at this point. Like this entire book, none of it makes sense. I've read it so many times.
Were you surprised by any of the answers that you found in the chapters?
Oh, sure. I mean, some of the answers, like the color blindness one, or not color blindness, but the question about do we see the same color, that was surprising because if you had asked me, I would say I don't speak in absolutes, right? Any good scientist doesn't speak in absolutes, but I would have reasoned through it and said, well, based on neural circuitry, we probably all have similar neural circuitry and we're evoking the same things in the same lobes. Likely we do. So that one was the most surprising to me for sure. I was like, wow, that's awesome.
Well, it's not necessarily about the book. So however,
we have to do it, but let's just boogie.
So has any of the research that you've done throughout your career, your career as a student, has that changed how you live your life? Has it made you look at things that you eat, drink, things like that? Has it made you look at them differently?
I'll answer this twofold. One, I'll answer the practical way. Yeah, absolutely. I have a bit more appreciation for sort of things that I put in my body or things that I do to my body, right? Like working out and all of the tissue damage that you undergo during that process. You also create a lot of sort of like metabolic byproducts, chemical nasties in your body. And so there is something to be said for taking in brightly colored, nutritious food or making sure you're supplementing your diet with antioxidants, because the role of antioxidants is to go and kind of clean that up. It's a little cleanup crew, right? And so I do think a lot about that. And I try to be very conscientious about the biochemistry part of things. And then the second question that I will answer for you, and this will be a first here. I've never been asked this question, so you heard it here first, folks. Philosophically, my life, I think, has changed a great deal because of the research that I've done. A lot of it being, working in these fields like oncology or peripheral nerve repair, where people are left with these deficits and you see quality of life drastically decrease. You see people who were young and healthy 6 months ago, suddenly they've been given these terrible prognoses for late stage disease. And a lot of it, I think, has made me exceptionally appreciative for the limited time that we have. Right. And not a lot of people, it's a weird thing to say, like not a lot of people are blessed to see this, but I think that, on social media, right, again, we have this tendency to see everything through rose colored glasses. And we're like, oh, this is so lovely. And that couple is, they're enjoying their life. They're a beautiful couple. And then you find out they've been fighting behind the scenes for months, and it's like this weird disparity. And I think that in my field, seeing not only what human beings go through, but sort of the fortitude that they have and what they can overcome it gives me goosebumps. I mean, it's humbling, it's beautiful, and it makes me appreciate my own health. It makes me appreciate the love of the people that I have in my life. And so I consider myself to be very fortunate to work every day in a field that impacts human life, because a lot of patients were like, oh, thank you for what you do when I was in oncology. And I'm like, you guys don't understand that I'm getting back from you tenfold. I'm just doing math and writing papers. You guys are giving me this very beautiful, very elegant, philosophic underpinning that now drives the way that I live my life and how I treat people. And that I try to lead with kindness, because you never know what people are going through. And so that's my 2-part answer for you.
I love that. Thank you.
Of course.
Nutritionally, you hit on this a bit. What would you want to tell the listeners? What could they do to, starting whatever day they listen to the podcast, what could they do right away to change some eating habits to help them be healthier?
Definitely increase your protein intake, especially because I know that both of you, you're into the workout scene, et cetera. And I'm assuming that a lot of your listeners probably are. And what women have been taught, and I mean, eating in general, I'm just going to talk to the ladies out there. Ladies, listen. eating has been sort of historically bastardized, right? For like a female population, like, oh, you got to work out and then you got to have like a single stalk of celery, right? And that came from like the crazy diet fads in like the 50s, you know what I mean? And you're like, that's crazy. Like, that is really crazy talk. And what
I hate to interrupt you, but I thought it was a piece of gum, an apple, and a Diet Coke.
Yeah, absolutely. Or like I always say like the New York model diet. Like I had a cigarette and a Diet Coke, you know what I mean? Like that was that was my splurge today. Um, and yeah, absolutely. And you know, a lot of people, I get these questions all the time. They're always like, you know, like, what do you do? What are you doing for your abs? What are you doing for this? Like, oh, I bet you don't eat. And I'm like, if you were to see what I just ate over the course of the last 3 days, you would be like, oh my gosh. But in effort to when you're building muscle, what you need to understand is that that requires a lot of macromolecules, specifically a lot of protein. And you also cannot neglect carbs. A lot of people like to carb starve themselves, but your body runs on glucose and your muscles contract with the energy that's stored in glycogen that's contained in your muscles. So you need to have these big macromolecules. And so I would say if you are stagnated in the gym, you're either not, you know, you feel weak, you are not lifting heavier when you should be, you feel like you've plateaued in your body composition. You're like, why am I not making gains? The first place you can start is your nutritional intake. You know, I mean, I eat a lot. Everybody always makes fun of me, all my friends, because I voice note because I don't have time to sit there and type. And every time I voice note any friend, you can hear me crunching in the background. It's just a constant stream of eating. And it has changed substantially my own body composition. I've seen that. You know, I'm 5'8". I used to be, I mean, at my heaviest, I was about 170. So, and that's about 30 pounds heavier than I am now. And I eat so much more than I did then. It's just that I'm eating for protein. I'm eating vegetables. I'm, you know, eating good, clean carbs, not like donuts, even though let me tell you, I love a donut. I love a donut. I'm a donut hound. But you know, and it changed. I mean, it changed like this. It's like the weight when you start giving your muscles the capacity to do what they do, right? That is your metabolic engine. And so cardio, you're burning calories during the act of cardio, but as soon as your heart rate settles down, like you're not burning calories anymore. When you do a heavy lifting sesh, you continue, and this is a known studied thing that it's been published, you continue to burn calories for like days afterwards. So fuel that fire. Yeah, absolutely. If you're like, well, where do I want to spend my time? Make a bunch of muscles and then you get to eat to fuel that muscle growth. And that's awesome. That's way better than a cigarette and a Diet Coke, you know what I mean? And a stick of gum.
I do remember one of your posts was what you did eat in a day. Somebody must have asked you that question. And you had made a comment about protein shake and then some scrambled eggs or some type of egg whites or maybe a couple of eggs with egg whites. I don't quite remember exactly. And then another protein shake. And then you had some vegetables or a salad for lunch. And then, yeah. So you were saying what you were eating. Now, of course, we all know that everybody is different and everybody has different goals, but it really hit home. You've got to get the protein in, and it should be a clean source of protein.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people, and I try to show that side because people are like, oh, you have abs, you must do so much cardio. And I'm like, I don't. I have like a day that I do cardio begrudgingly because I'm like, all right, heart, I know you want to keep ticking. I'm doing this for you. I hate it, but like, this is for you. This is your day today. So I'll do like a heart healthy day. But then other than that, you know, it's just managing body composition through mostly, and I tell everybody abs start in the kitchen. And that's 100% true. And, you know, you will find, actually a friend of mine, he's doing an interesting, and we were tracking his metrics and he keeps showing me, he's got a glucose monitor and he's been tracking what spikes his glucose. And it's crazy because he can house like a pack of M&Ms and there'll be like a little bump, but he had like mandarin oranges and that thing skyrocketed. And he was like, okay, so I probably shouldn't be eating mandarin oranges. And it's so, you know, to your point, I think that there are different things that sort of trigger, you know, glucose spikes and like insulin rushes, et cetera, in people when they eat certain things. But for the most part, clean, lean sources of protein, excellent choice, trying to stay away from bolusing glucose, because the thing about the human body is that it will store glucose in the form of fat. There's no storage system for protein. So you can just kind of eat protein and graze on it all the time, and nothing's really going to happen. You're just going to use protein on the fly. But glucose, evolutionarily, your body was like, listen, we are chasing mammoths and this is really hard work. So we're going to land a mammoth like once every 3 months. Other than that, you're on your own. So your body became really, really good at storing glucose in the form of fat. So that during those lean months when you couldn't eat really well, or it was winter, there weren't a lot of berries to collect, you still had energy to burn and you still had stuff to run on. And, you know, thank you, ancestors, for keeping us going as a species. But also now, like, I eat a donut and I jiggle for a week and that sucks, but it's all just a part of this like really elegant physiologic system that's meant to keep us going in lean times. So when you understand a little bit about the evolutionary purpose of some of these things, I think sometimes it makes it easier to make food choices. You're like, okay, cool. Well, like, I could eat these 16 chocolate croissants, but my body is going to be like, heck yeah. And it's just going to store it immediately, right? Because that's what it's been designed to do. So,
yeah. Here's there are no stupid questions in science question.
Ooh.
I've been reading that the human body can only process 30 grams of protein per hour. It's true?
Yeah, I think I've seen it's in that ballpark. I think it really depends. It depends on really your body composition. It depends on your age, things like that. But I've seen 20 to 30 seems to be the range.
Okay.
And a lot of it too is, you know, if you just had like a massive session and you're like, you know, you for whatever reason, you're like, I'm going to work out for 4 hours today. I just had a fight with my significant other. So I'm going to work out for 4 hours, super heavy lifting. And I hit every muscle in the body. You can probably utilize more than that because your body is it's playing cleanup and it's using that protein on the fly to help rebuild. But yeah, I think like for most people, 20 to maybe 40 if you're like a huge dude. But yeah, that seems to be the sweet spot.
Tell us about your 60-second science update.
Sure. So the whole public science communication thing, it really started on Facebook. I was doing more and more sort of dangerous chemical explosions live on Facebook Live for the amusement of my friends. And I have a private profile, and my friends, they'd be sitting there egging me on in the chat, you know, like you see little hearts going, and they're like, yeah, that's crazy. And then what happened is that one day I torched a shower curtain to absolute ashes in my bathroom, trying to replicate and show a model of like a dual phase rocket engine. And I mean, this thing went up. And I was like, oh, geez. So I was like, you know, I shouldn't do science in the house. That's lesson one. But lesson two is that everybody was like, Leah, you're like the new Bill Nye. You should totally take this public. And I was like, you know, I can do it safer. So I'm going to start lecturing. And so that's when I opened up the public Instagram that you guys know about. And I started out, I called it 60 seconds of science, and everybody's like, you're so clever. What a marketer. And I'm like, no, it's just because Instagram only allotted 60 seconds at the time. And it's not clever at all. I was just lazy. I'm like, I'm not going to edit. I'm just going to do like one read through, and it is what it is. It goes up. And so then, because it was so quick, and it was like this very sort of like staccato delivery, because I had to get everything in 60 seconds. And I also had an intro and an outro. So it was more like 45 seconds. And then reels became a thing, and you can use the green screen functionality. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to evolve this, because as I speak very quickly, I can throw up stuff behind me on this green screen, and I can show people pictures. And some of them are scientific. Some of them are like silly memes. But I think it makes it a bit more engaging for the audience as well. So it's sort of, there's the odd-ended like old school follower that's like, bring back 60 seconds of science. And I'm like, no, but this is so much better because I can speak for a little bit longer. And I also have a green screen, and that's way cool. I can put up memes. Look how funny this meme is. So
what is your next book? You made a comment about your next book is going to be, what is the next book going to be about?
So I have now at this point, when I wrote There Are No Stupid Questions, it was kind of my intent to just write the book. I didn't say like, you know, I'm going to be an author and I'm going to do this as a career. But during the course of it, I really found my passion for writing. So since that time, I mean, this idea came about 3 years ago. I now have about 13 book ideas. So the next several, right, there's always the question of, because There Are No Stupid Questions has such great reviews and the audience loves it, do I write a volume 2? right? So that's kind of like with the publisher, that's they can sort of exercise that if they want. And I have the questions for it. So we're ready to do that if we need to. And then the other couple books that I'm working on, one of them is sort of scientific explanations for like sticky situations that you might find yourself in. Like, so as a, for instance, quite literally sticky situation, I have an author also at my publishing house. We've become friends. And he sent me a text the other day and he's like, hey, I got a weird question for you. My wife accidentally washed a diaper in the washing machine and there's like gel coated all of the inside and all of the clothes from the diaper. And he's like, how is there like a scientific way to get rid of this? And I was like, funny you should mention that. That's sodium acrylate. And if you put salt in the washer, it will break all of that down. And he did. And he's like, brilliant. It worked. So one of my next ideas is kind of taking situations you might find yourself in that could be highly specific and weird or maybe more generalized, and like how would a scientist approach it to like get you out of that situation if you had like a scientist in your back pocket that could help you out in that particular instance. And then the other one I was talking about earlier, this one is something that people request of me often. You know, they always say like, hey, I'm taking turmeric or something. Is there any evidence to suggest that works? Or, am I just flushing money down the toilet more or less? And so the next one, rather than being like a Q&A type style, it's a bit more long form and investigative, and it's debunking pseudoscience in consumer products. And so that book is called Dear Consumer. And it talks about like, what are the limitations of the FDA and FTC? Why are there so many kind of snake oil products on the market with a combined $1 trillion valuation for these industries? And then just like a battery of like products that we all have in our homes that literally do nothing, but our second nature, because it's sort of either like, old world medicine, or, it's been circulated so many times through urban myth that these things work. And there's literally zero evidence to suggest that they work. So that's the next one. And a fun fact for those of you listening, things in your medicine cabinet, like NyQuil, Tylenol, none of them are FDA cleared for what they do. Not a single one. And the supplements, all of your supplements, your multivitamin, take a little like a field trip if you're listening to this, and go and look at like whatever supplements you're taking and roll the bottle to the back. And there will be either on the bottom or sort of rotated 90 degrees, a little statement that says like these claims have not been cleared by the FDA. And so anytime a supplement comes to market, they do not have to prove efficacy. They do not have to prove that it's safe. It is on because of all this like legislative change over the course of decades, it is the FDA has the burden of proving harm rather than supplement manufacturers proving safety. And that's something that nobody knows and nobody talks about. So that's part of Dear Consumer, is talking about this interesting thing that people are like, of course, like it's NyQuil or it's a multivitamin. Like, of course the FDA says it's safe. And no, not at all. They don't even look at it. Not until like damage is being done and somebody alerts them like, hey, there's like several dozen people that just took this multivitamin and they're getting like incredibly ill because it's contaminated with lead or something. And not until that point, the FDA won't touch any supplement.
I had no idea.
Yeah. So Dear Consumer is currently being written, and it's I think it's going to be a cool book, and it's going to be eye-opening. And that's one of the things about science, is that it's not just meant to be like, how does the universe work? Like, science can be very empowering for people. It's like, it can empower you to make decisions about your health, your body, your family, where you live, what you eat, what you drink, etc. So it's sort of meant to kind of be like, here's some cool things to consider, and then here's how you can do your own cross-checking in the future. If you're like, I don't know if this works, I can, and the end is sort of like a roadmap for the consumer. Like, how would I cross-check to see if this is actually something that I should be doing or taking, or et cetera.
I've bought it already and it's not even out.
It's not even written. It's like 20% written.
Because you do such a great job of explaining things, are you considering a science book for children?
That's a really good question. So one of the unexpected things about There Are No Stupid Questions is that it was written for adults, and there's a limited amount of profanity. There's like 5 instances. There's like an F-bomb, I think, once. But what was crazy is that when the book dropped, I was getting parents sending me videos of their kids holding the book, or their kids sitting there like flipping through the pages. And I mean, I'm talking about like kids like 11, 9 years old. And that was so surprising to me. And I was like, oh, just so you know, there's a couple of profane, and they're like, oh, that's okay. They hear it all the time. It doesn't matter. But I was not anticipating this fervor for that. And so that's something that my publisher and I are considering right now is not only do we do a kids version, but is there a way, because it's been requested of us, to potentially integrate it into curriculum in schools, to give just like little fun things the teachers can pepper into the students day to day as they're learning certain subjects to just make it a little bit more engaging. So in the process of, I think we're seeing there's like a whole bunch of, there's a whole other world of like the education that I know nothing about. So I'm kind of just hanging on for dear life here, trusting my publisher.
What is one subject that you study or research that sends you down a rabbit hole? Like, where do you, all of a sudden you're like, it's like spending 7 hours on Facebook. Wait a second.
Totally. One of the things that I can spend all day thinking about and looking up is quantum mechanics. So I explained this on a reel not too long ago, as quickly as I could. There's this dualistic existence in the world, right? You've got the world of classical mechanics in physics, and that's, throwing a baseball, that's driving a car. It's the physics like we all know, like dropping a hammer on your foot, right? These are the physics of the intuitive because they're things that we see every day. Quantum mechanics is the way that physics works on the subatomic particle level, how photons work, how electrons work. They do not work like they work in a grand scale, right? If I were to take an electron and versus a baseball, and I crack a baseball in a stadium, if you were to tell me the speed and the angle at which that baseball leaves my bat, I can tell you where it will land, right? I can calculate that mathematically. I know it. If you were to do the same thing with an electron, if I had like the teensiest, tiniest subatomic bat, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to like metaphorically hit this electron, I would not be able to tell you where that electron is going to go. There is no definite trajectory. It is a probability. There's like a cloud of where it will land somewhere in the ether. You don't know. And it's the most bizarre thing. So like subatomic particles, they act as if they're all in cars, they're driving in multiple cars down like an infinite number of paths simultaneously. Not infinite, but they're driving in so many different paths simultaneously. It's not until you measure it, you know exactly where it ended up. Super duper strange. And we don't know. We know that this is a thing. We know that it's not like theoretical. We know that this is something that happens, but we cannot explain why. So one of my favorite things is like going down the rabbit hole of all of the theories that exist for why. And one of them is called the many worlds interpretation, that, well, the reason that these subatomic particles have all these different paths is because there are infinite numbers of realities in the world. And it just so happens that this electron is sort of like bouncing in and out of realities. And then this is our reality. And so you measure it and you focus it in. I mean, it's bizarre. It makes no sense, but it makes all the sense. And you just sit there and you're like, what does the world even mean? So that is like a love of mine. I have in my bookshelf, we talked about this a little bit off camera earlier. I have a lot of quantum theory in the bookshelf, and it's so bizarre. You're like, this is science fiction. There's no way this is real, but it's absolutely real and measured and has been measured for 100 years. So.
Thank you. I have one more question. How did you file through all of the questions you had for this book and pick the subjects that you did?
Oh, that's a good question. So a lot of it was, I wanted to make the sections more or less equal, because what people ask of, it's a lot of like biology or medicine, it's things that are intuitive to us, right? Things that you can kind of see. The questions that were a little bit that I had to sort of like really kind of bolster were chemistry and physics, right? So a lot of it was, I picked bio and medicine and space first, because these were the ones where I just had like a litany of questions and I had a lot to pull from. And then when I looked at the absolute paucity of chemistry and physics, I was like, okay, I've got like maybe 20 questions for each of these. So in order to make them more or less proportionally equal, I'm going to have to parse down 20. And so I tried to select questions that would be, in my opinion, which is very subjective, but would be the most awe-inspiring, and questions that I could see anybody in the world being like, oh yeah, I totally was, drinking beer with my buddies and we talked about that the other night. You know what I mean? Like something that everybody had probably asked at some point. Because there's very specific ones that I get asked, but I wanted generalized so that when you read it, you're like, oh my God, my buddy Marty, we literally were just talking about this the other day. And I think it hit because a few of the reviews are like, I brought it to work and we've all been sitting around on lunch break talking about all these passages, which is really, really cool.
Is there anything that you would like the listeners to know before we wrap up?
It's a good question. Where do you begin? Well, one, for anybody listening, we talked a little bit about kind of my trajectory in life, right? So I did sportscasting and then I did a hard U-turn back into the sciences. And then through the course of the sciences, my CV is a little bit atypical for a scientist. Usually you focus on one thing and that's kind of like your thing. You are an expert in that thing. And instead I've done technologic development. I've done orthopedics and oncology and nerve repair. So I have allowed my personality type to drive the way that I operate professionally. But the thing that you can take from that, if you're not a scientist, but you're sitting there and you're like, I don't know that I'm happy in what I'm doing, right? You can make hard pivots in life. And if you have a good support system, it doesn't even have to be like an in-house support system, but you have friends that believe in you, you can and should do that, right? Life is so precious. And if you're sitting there and you're like, God, I'm just not happy, you can find a way to make that work. You can find a way to pivot. I've done multiple hard pivots, right? I did sportscasting into medicine, and then I went to med school, and then I left halfway through. And that's a huge thing to try to do. I mean, I racked my brain over that for a really long time. And parts of me are still like, was that the right call? But I'm happy now. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, the gift of working with patients that are sick is knowing how precious life is and how limited your time is. So if you're sitting there and you're thinking and you've been bemoaning on a possible pivot in your life, from the queen of pivoting, I can tell you that it's possible. And not only that, you will find that your quality of life will benefit from it. And what you do end up doing, you will put so much more of your passion and heart and soul into it. And as a byproduct, you will be very, very successful at it. I find that success is often a product of passion, because if you love something and you love it so deeply, you will do anything to keep going and to move it forward and to push the needle. And that's where you find success, right? Success is not like an ethereal thing. Like I just woke up and I was successful. It is the difference between what you're doing today and your dream is just putting steps in place to achieve it. And I cannot tell, like I have done this so many times and so many people are afraid of it. I mean, I'm going to be 38, right? So I'm young, but I'm not like young, not my 20s, right? And I've done this so many times. And I always tell people when they're like, I want to go back to school, but like that seems sketchy. And I'm like, how long have you wanted to go back to school? And they're like, years. And I'm like, do it yesterday. Enroll in a class, or there's like master class if you want to get your feet wet. There's free courses, like Harvard even offers free courses that you can audit. Go and just get your feet wet and do it, because when it's tragic, but it's beautiful. I've been with so many patients that are at the end of their life, and the things that they regret are not, man, I regret selling my earthly possessions and traveling around the country. They're like, I regret not taking the leap. So do it now. Don't wait. And so if I had to give your listeners anything, that's what it would be.
I love that.
That's fantastic.
To all of our listeners, stay awesome and keep reaching for your anything.